Hey there everyone, this is Samuel Johnson and welcome back to the MTV Spider-Man Retrospectives. And today we're going to be discussing episode 3 of Spider-Man, the new animated series, Law of the Jungle. And in this episode we're introduced to the Lizard. Now, if you're aware of your Spider-Man mythology, then you're probably aware of who the Lizard is. But if, on the off chance that you don't, I'll give you like a quick summation of the Lizard and his backstory. Essentially, the Lizard is a scientist by the name of Dr. Curtis Connors, who is a brilliant mind in his field, very much knowledgeable about genetics and other forms of research. But at some point in time, he wound up losing his right arm, and to try and get it back, he wound up experimenting with reptilian DNA, since they have the ability to regenerate any lost limbs. He ultimately created a serum that, when he injected it into himself, allowed him to regrow his arm, but the reptilian DNA wound up mixing with his human DNA a little too well, and he wound up transforming into a giant anthropomorphic lizard called, well, the Lizard. As a result, and unfortunately, the lizard DNA brought out his more feral side, and he became a supervillain that Spider-Man has clashed with on a number of occasions. And as such, this episode is meant to just introduce the lizard into this show's continuity, and basically pretty much everything I just said is exactly what happens. There are some added details here and there to tie the story more into the show itself and help get a plot going, but otherwise, it's pretty much the same thing. Although in this case, Peter actually was working with Dr. Connors to perfect the serum, because it turns out Dr. Connors is a professor at Peter's college, and when he and Dr. Connors are working on creating the serum to regrow lost limbs, so Dr. Connors pretty much just shoos Peter out of the lab before he injects it with himself, or injects himself with it. As a result, it's kind of how the story. As such, from there, the story is about him just gradually more and more losing himself to the lizard part of his brain as the transformation becomes more and more gradual, and little by little the man is lost to the monster. It's standard. It's the standard stuff with the lizard, but to try and bring more unique flair to it, we do have more of the there's more side plots going on. In this case, the anniversary of Harry's father's death is coming up. And so, as a result of this, Harry wants to go through his father's old junk that he keeps around the office. And Peter and MJ, fully aware of how much this day probably hits Harry, have offered to help him clear stuff out. Unfortunately, though, Peter can only help out for so much. Because after Dr. Connors wound up injecting himself with the serum to regrow his arm, he wound up having a run-in with this street thug who tried robbing an armored car, and Spider-Man wound up saving Connors and stopping the robber. But when Peter switched back out of his Spidey jammies and met up with Connors, because Peter was trying to meet with him to exchange notes about the experiment, the cop that Dr. Connors was talking to about the incident questioned why Peter was there at all, and when Peter couldn't give him a clear answer, he said he wanted to see him the next day. So, as a result, Peter has to bail out. Unfortunately, though, this is when the lizard starts coming out because, well, Dr. Connors thinks of the street thug as nothing more than vermin that needs to be exterminated. And as a result, as Peter is being, well, interrogated in the next room over, that guy is also being interrogated, because the police think that the street hooligan was working with Spider-Man, which is stupid in several regards, but honestly, it's not out of their own possibility, and probably could have been the case. They're probably just looking for anything to nab Spider-Man. Bottom line, however, as the interrogations are going on, the power in the police station goes out, and while the cops that are interrogating Peter and this guy go out to investigate, that's when the lizard strikes, and put simply, he ends up killing the man. Now, Peter can see this all through through two-way glass, so when he sees the assault, he gets into his Spidey jammies and pursues the lizard. But unfortunately, by the time he catches up with him on the roof, the lizard manages to pretty much beat him single-handedly and escape. Although Spider-Man is able to get a bit of cloth that was ripped off in the struggle. As such, Spider-Man swings away and presumably returns to the police station dressed in his Peter Parker guise. But little by little, we see that Connors is more and more losing himself to the lizard. As the next day when Peter goes in for classes, it turns out Connors canceled his, and in Peter's own words, Connors never cancels a class. And when Peter goes to talk with him about this, Connors is not really giving any straight answers, even claiming that that he's going to continue the experiments that he and Peter were working on himself. This conversation is happening in Dr. Connor's lab, and he's of course got his hood up because at this point he's pretty much gone full lizard and he doesn't want Peter to see it. So as Peter tries getting closer to him, Connors is doing everything he can so that Peter only sees his back, so he can't actually hear, so he can't talk to him. But it turns out that Connors has been looking through old files, old newspaper articles that he's been keeping around the lab. Again, it turns out that the accident that cost him his arm its source is a little close to home. You see, it turns out that years prior, Dr. Connors was working on reptiles out of a lab in a swamp. There was nothing really too dangerous about it. It was just him conducting some experiments. And not that far away, there was a secret government project involving a new kind of explosives. Or, no, new kind of explosive. That was very poor pronunciation right there. As a result of those experiments, Dr. Connors was caught in the crossfire and he lost his arm. Naturally, he sued the company that was responsible for this, but unfortunately, after 10 years of having it go in and out of courts, the case was just dropped because someone pulled strings. And put simply, Dr. Connors ain't happy about it. As such, while Peter is still a little hesitant and thinks that Connors does need help, Connors does successfully manage to shoo him out of the lab. Though Peter, of course, notices some scales on the newspaper articles, and as he leaves, he grabs Dr. Connors' lab coat without him noticing. And sure enough, he does confirm through the various genetic samples he found from the scales on the papers to the hair follicles on his lab coat to even the scrap of cloth that he lost at the police precinct, that the lizard and Dr. Connors are one and the same. But it's like I said, the lizard part is winning out. He's gradually transforming more and more. And throughout the episode, as Dr. Connors is kind of losing himself more and more to the lizard, you see him injecting himself more and more with the lizard DNA, which in turn is causing him to become more feral. And of course comes to a head when we learn the company behind the experiments. You see, going back to Harry, as he was looking through his dad's old stuff, he managed to find some contracts for some secret government, well, I guess you could say government projects, including one about the explosives and how in his father's last few days he seemed to be getting a little erratic, and it's becoming clear to Harry that something was up with his dad. Case in point, though, one of those old contracts, the explosives. Yeah, it turns out that the company that was experimenting with that new kind of explosive was Oscorp. And, of course, Dr. Connors is fully aware of this, and he wants to make Oscorp pay. But since Osborn Sr. is no longer around to pay the bill, Osborn Jr. will do just fine. And so after he injects himself with another dose of the lizard serum, Dr. Connors heads to Oscorp to get Harry's head on a pike. Unfortunately, by the time Peter realizes the lizard and Dr. Connors are one and the same, and that Oscorp are the ones responsible for this, he's too late. The lizard's already gone. As such, Peter gets into his Spidey jammies and swings to Oscorp to try and head him off, but unfortunately he's too little too late. Harry's still alive by the time he gets there, but he and the lizard are kind of in combat. Thankfully, Spider-Man is able to come in and fight the lizard off, and Harry, now kind of out of harm's way, does end up calling the cops. Throughout the fight, though, Peter is continually trying to reason with Dr. Connors, tell him, I know it's you in there, you have to give yourself up, we can help you, you just gotta do this, but throughout the fight, it's clear that whatever part of Dr. Connor's brain that was sentient is buried very much under the lizard, because he is not talking to Peter at all, just roaring and snarling and just intent and showing clearly that he wants the good spider's head on a pike as well. Eventually, though, the things do come to a head as the police arrive, and the fight ends up going to Oscorp's roof, and so Peter ends up webbing to the underside of the police chopper and he webs the lizard too, and the police end up flying away with them underneath because they think that they can get them to a cell, But unfortunately, in the Lizard struggling, he manages to break the web line that Spidey was using to hold him, and, well, they were very high up, and unfortunately he ends up falling to the street below, and, well, he dies. As such, that's the end of the Lizard, and while Harry is safe, he's still trying to come to terms with what the secret side of his father. As such, Peter and MJ meet up with him later, and he's clearly fine. And like I said, he's physically fine, but he does still want to be left alone, so he sends Peter and MJ off to go get pizza. And while Peter and MJ end up sharing a moment because MJ's impressed that Peter is putting so much time into helping his friend, Harry is still clearly coming to terms with what he learned, and based on his expressions, it's not exactly helping him out mentally. So yeah, that's the episode. Overall, it's not bad. It's good. I do like it. I think that if I can list any flaws with it, it would potentially be Dr. Connors as a character. Well, the thing is, one of the aspects of the Lizard that I think works well is the tragedy of it. The Lizard is meant to be one of those very much tragic Spider-Man villains, who ultimately is done in by the circumstances that helped create him. Because at the end of the day, all Dr. Connors wanted to do was get his arm back. He's not, and he does, and as such, when he finally does get his arm back, unfortunately, it comes at a price. It's essentially a Faustian bargain. He got exactly what he asked for, but there's a twist to it, and as a result of this, he's transformed into a literal monster. Now, part of the tragedy with the Lizard is seeing the Dr. Connors personality slowly be subsumed by it, or have it just be gone and have this feral monster remain. Most versions of the story have that, as we see Dr. Connors just slowly lose himself. Even if the Lizard is intelligent, the Dr. Connors aspect of his personality is just little by little subsumed. We even saw that in the Amazing Spider-Man movies. While the Lizard was intelligent in those movies, at the same time, it's clear that Dr. Connors is no longer in the driver's seat. And if he is, it's clear his mind's been very much altered. At the same time, though, this one, while there is clear alteration between Dr. Connors and the Lizard, there isn't much of a gap between both mindsets. When we're first introduced to Dr. Connors, he seems very... I don't want to call him an ass, but at the same time, he doesn't exactly exude friendliness, so to speak. The first time we see him, he and Peter are working together on the Lizard serum, and at the time when we see him, Peter is just kind of staring outside the lab and seeing all these people having fun outside the campus, and then Dr. Connor's like, Peter, what the hell are you doing? It's just kind of very much all business all the time kind of person. It's very much anger. His voice is kind of low, very much monotone, and if he gets angry, it gets deeper and more gravelly. It's clear that the guy is, like, it doesn't really look like he makes a lot of friends, and every interaction between him and Peter makes it clear that their relationship is very much master and apprentice. He doesn't treat Peter as like a friend or an equal, he treats him like a student. And to be fair, that does make sense, because Dr. Connors is a teacher at the school and Peter is a student. He's 18 years old and he goes to this college. So of course he would still see Peter as probably just another student that's just there to learn. But at the same time, there's nothing really friendly between them. Like, he's never truly, there's no real animosity between him and Peter, as Peter does clearly respect him, and he does clearly care enough about him to at least attempt to try and fix him. But at the same time, it's not exactly clear what aspects about him are very redeeming. I feel like that what made him more tragic is that we saw him more in his everyday life. Saw him as a person, not what he did as a part of his daily routine, like interacting with other people, other teachers and faculty. Maybe show that there is more to his personality than just kind of the hard ass. But here we only get a little bit of that, and then that's when he first injects himself with a lizard serum to grow his arm back. After that, he's not really in a good mood for the rest of the episode. When that guy was stealing the armored truck, he immediately confronted him and called him vermin. And once the guy was captured, he made an analogy to that the guy should have his eyes pecked out by owls. At which point after that, we saw him go full lizard to try and kill him. And after that, we see him just kind of we see him as the lizard just kind of stewing in his lab, saying, "Stay away from me," and obviously kind of stewing about getting revenge on Oscorp for what they did to him. Again, it's more, and don't get me wrong, it works as a villain because the lizard itself is genuinely creepy. I do like the build up and seeing how it's and seeing him transform, as we see as it's the animal aspect of the lizard is more emphasized in this version. He's more of a feral monster, only going after he's like a gun. It's just essentially point and shoot with him. Whatever got on Dr. Connor's nerves is what the lizard is going after. And it's clear that it's clear that he's going after it with pure animalistic instinct. He just wants to kill the thing that's pissing him off. At first, it was a random guy stealing an armored truck. Next, it's the head of a major corporation because his daddy was in charge of a project that cost him his arm. So it's clear that while Dr. Connors has enough guiding intelligence to direct the lizard, like with Bruce Banner and the Hulk, once that beast is out of the cage, there's no real stopping it, and it's going to go after anything that gets its attention. Case in point, in the climax of the episode, when Spider-Man was fighting the lizard, he tried reasoning with it, tried talking with it like it was a man, but it showed no indication throughout the episode that it understood him. It only saw him as a threat, this thing that was in its way, and it was getting on its and Spider-Man was clearly just getting on its nerves. That's why it wanted to kill him. It wasn't because, oh, you're protecting Osborn, you're in league with him. No, it's a gut. In the lizard's eyes, he's a guy in red and blue pajamas that wants to fight him. Ergo, might as well off him. So that's just kind of how it works with the lizard, and it's creepy enough, especially in the build-up to actually seeing the lizard, because Connors is the lizard, but in the beginning it's just little snippets here and there. You don't see him fully until the third act, and throughout the rest of the episode, he's either in shadows or you see the aftermath of it, or for example, when he killed the hoodlum that stole the armored truck, you just see the guy get thrown into the glass. Then when the police investigate, they find the guy's body and his hand is chopped off. So that's just, it's creepy. It does build up tension. When you actually see the lizard, you know that this thing is just a monster. The only reason it's doing any of this is because it wants to kill. So it does work in that regard. As a villain, it works great. But it does take away more tragic aspect of the character, since again, we didn't see a lot of Dr. Connors prior to his transformation, and when we do actually see him, he was kind of a hard ass. So, yeah, that is kind of a minor flaw against the episode. With that being said, though, the rest of the episode is fine. There's nothing really new character dynamic wise with Peter, as again, it's just him trying to solve the mystery. And to be fair, the episode does show him being competent and using his high intelligence to try and figure out the connection between the lizard and Dr. Connors, like picking up little clues, finding things here and there, and taking notes about Connors' accelerated altered genetics. I do like seeing that. It continues to show that Peter Parker is very brilliant and a very competent superhero, that not only is he good at fighting and making quips, but he is intelligent and can easily connect the dots. And so when he does realize that Dr. Connors is the lizard, he realizes he's a threat, and when he goes to confront him, well, he's gone, and he finds a news article indicating Oscorp as the people responsible for what happened to him, and he knows, oh shit, Harry's in trouble. So I do like that. It does still showcase him being intelligent, but one aspect that I do genuinely like that I think I would like to have seen more of if the show had gone past one season, it's Harry. In this episode, we see more of Harry kind of peeking behind the curtain. Like I said, the show was based off of the continuity of the first Sam Raimi Spider-Man movie. As a result, Norman Osborn is dead, and Harry thinks that Spider-Man was responsible, even though, as we know, glider, flip, blah. But in this case, we see Harry learning more about what the kind of person his dad was. With these secret government projects, what he was doing, and on top of that, the kind of man he was up until his death. It doesn't make him change his mind completely, but by the end of the episode, you do see that it gets to him. And there are later episodes where we do see him questioning his feud with Spider-Man and his dad's involvement in that. I don't think there are a lot, but it's enough to make him at least reconsider what happened to his father, and while by the end of the episode, he still thinks that Spider-Man killed his dad and that it was wrong. At the same time, he is thinking, just what kind of a man was my father? And honestly, if the show had continued past for the first season, it would have been cool to see that dynamic grow and see how that would have affected Harry. Would it have led him down a light path or a dark path? Would he eventually have forgiven Spider-Man, or would he continue to see him as a monster? I do like that. It's just a little hint of where things could have gone. And I think that if the show had continued on, it would have been a storyline that could have been explored. So I genuinely liked that. Otherwise, though, still good action. I do like seeing the battles between Spider-Man and the Lizard, as we see these two acrobatic fighters climbing walls, attacking each other. We see all the capabilities of them, how they work. Like I said, the Lizard's like an animal, so it's kind of cool seeing him kind of use that animalistic strength and instinct. On top of that, I guess this is like I almost forgot this minor thing. We finally see the show's J. Jonah Jameson, and while I'll just say this right now, he's all right. Like I don't hate him. He's a fast talker like every other J. Jonah Jameson, and he clearly jumps from one topic to the next, even mentioning something about the human rat that he thinks he could easily publish about. But he does have the fast talking nature that you would expect of J. Jonah Jameson, but maybe J.K. Simmons has kind of spoiled me because I'm more used to the shouting, angry J. Jonah Jameson, who can move from one topic to the next just as quickly as this version does, but he makes sure that his voice is the only one you hear when you're in the same room as him. So I don't know. I guess I prefer that version. I guess I prefer those versions of J. Jonah Jameson over this one. He's not bad, just I don't know. I prefer the louder one, I guess. But that's a minor thing at best. But again, yeah, overall, it's still a decent episode. It is still a good episode. While the Dr. Connors aspect of the Lizard I felt could have had more time to it, the actual Lizard himself makes for a rather creepy villain, especially in the build up to he is. And there is still some of the tragedy, I guess, especially with the final shot of the Lizard dying. You see just a single tear go from his eye before he, fades. Well, not literally, but you know what I mean. And of course, there's still the stuff with Harry and him learning more and more about who his dad was. We got more. We got some more of Spidey still being a cool and competent hero. The pacing's still decent. Overall, still a good episode. So, yeah, that's about it. Thank you for watching. I'm Samuel Johnson, and I'll see you next week. Take care.